visitors. I want to acknowledge we have some special visitors. That's why I was going to introduce Jay as my twin brother. Actually, these are from new friends we met them on Bonita Beach. And Jay is one. Jay Knight, and then they have a little daughter, Chloe. How old is Chloe? 4. And then her mother, Lorraine, was with them. But I said, really, Chloe was the one responsible for the meeting. So Lauren had been out on the paddleboard, and we were coming back in the shore, and I mean, she was just like intent. She was looking at that board, and I said, "You want to take a ride?" And she literally jumped right on the board. So we got to talk, but they're actually from Vermont, but they're frequent visitors here to Florida, and actually been planning to make a move. And Jay is a very talented guy. His own company. So I'll give you some links later, but he does beautiful pavement work, you know. I'll go over and you said that you want to try now to get into some excavation work as well. So we got some other craftsmen here. This guy's an electrician, we got a mechanical. But I've been trying to kind of help him advertise and promote his business, and I'm very happy that they answered, texted me this week. He said, "Where are you going to be this week?" And I told him, he said, "We'll be there." Yeah. Great to have. Okay. What we have on the board here, this is the second half of the Old Testament. And, you know, Abraham lived like 2000 BC. Of course, God had promised to bring Christ in through him, but also promised to make him the nation of Israel. So those things all transpired, and after the time of the judges, you know, Israel wanted a king, ruling like all the other nations. And so God gave him Solomon, and so he was followed by David and Solomon. Each reigned for 40 years, so this United Kingdom stood for 120 years. But after the death of Solomon, the division among the tribes, you had the northern kingdom of Israel that's going to have 200-year history. The division occurred around 933, and on 721, they were taken into Assyrian captivity. Let's think on this cause here before you can. How come the numbers are getting smaller? So they're decreasing and getting closer to the time of Christ. So it was 200 years, and so the Assyrians took that northern kingdom and scattered them out among the nations and brought other people into the land of Israel. Now, so the southern kingdom of Judah lasted about 100 years longer, and they eventually went into Babylonian captivity. In this period, from the captivity really to the time of Malachi, around 430, that 500-year period, this is going to serve as background to the prophet. So when you're reading your prophet Isaiah, Hosea, whatever, you know, it's going to fall into this historical period. During the time of the divided kingdom, the two main powers in the world were Syria to the north and Egypt to the south. But another kingdom came to power, the Babylonians. And the Babylonians, of course, under Nebuchadnezzar, they defeated both the Assyrians and Egypt, and they're the ones who took the people of Judah into captivity. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is going to come in 3 waves. He comes in 606. This is when Daniel and those prominent people were taken into captivity. He's going to come again in 597, and that's when Ezekiel, the second group of pastors, is taken. Then he's going to come one final time, 586. This is when that last king, Zedekiah, rebelled against him. So that time, the Babylonians came and destroyed the temple of Jerusalem. Now, the prophet Jeremiah had predicted that they would go into captivity for 70 years. And that's what happened, because the Babylonians were defeated by the Persians. And all this will be background for our lesson today. And so in 536, they were allowed to return. The temple was rebuilt. And during the time of Persians, the time of Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, leading up to the time of Malachi. But after Malachi, there's going to be a period of 400 years silence. So there's going to be no active prophet leading up to the time of Christ, and that silence was broken. That voice crying in the wilderness when John came to prepare the way for Jesus. Well, we're not left in the dark, because during the Babylonian captivity, the time of Daniel, God, through a series of prophecies and visions, he tells us what's going to happen from this time of Babylonian captivity to the coming of Christ. Now, I've been kind of walking you through the book of Daniel. You know, when we looked at it, came and Daniel and his companions were taken into captivity and trained to be in service to the kingdom of Babylon. And in the second chapter, we saw that King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that disturbed him, and that dream was only interpreted by Daniel. None of his wise men could interpret that dream. But God revealed to Daniel what in that dream was about him having this great image. Image of his head was gold, arms of silver, belly of bronze, legs of iron clay. And he saw a stone that was cut out without hands that hit that image on the feet. Broken into pieces, that image was taken away, but that stone grew into a great mountain filled with the earth. And Daniel interpreted that. He said, "You're the head of gold." And he said, "There's going to be another kingdom after you," referring to the Medes and Persians. Then a third empire, the Greeks, and then the Roman Empire. He said, "In the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up his kingdom, and there will be destroyed." And the reason God's kingdom will never be destroyed because it's the church, it's a spiritual kingdom. And so God, through Daniel, was telling us what was going to happen. We saw then, when we studied the third chapter of Daniel, that Nebuchadnezzar, in his ego, because he'd seen that, had that dream of this great image, he built a great image. And he commanded, of course, that anytime people would hear all this music play, they had to fall out and worship this image. And of course, Daniel's companions, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were Jewish people that only worshiped the God of heaven. Because they would not worship the image, they were cast into the burning fiery furnace. But again, God saved them from that furnace. And in the fourth chapter, book of Daniel, we see that Nebuchadnezzar had to learn a hard lesson. Well, he was still arrogant now. He was impressed when God had saved the people from the burning fiery furnace, but he still had an ego. And he had another dream about this tree that high reached to heaven and leads to the end of the world. It had beautiful leaves and had fruit to feed everyone. But he saw that tree cut down. But it says its root was left. A band was placed in the root. And once again, nobody can interpret that dream. So Daniel came along. And Daniel said, "That tree is beautiful." He said, because under all the earth, God has given all people, beasts, the whole world, control by Nebuchadnezzar. He said, in fact, you saw it cut down. He said, you're going to be driven from men for a time. But the fact that band was left on it, your kingdom will be returned to you. And so Daniel pleaded with Nebuchadnezzar to humble himself before God. And like human, he did good for a while. But it said at the end of 12 months, he walked out and he said, "It's not this great Babylon that I've built by my power and my majesty." And at that very hour, it said, a voice came from heaven. He was driven from among men. He lived like a wild beast to the point, it said his hair grew long like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. But then finally, as the dream had predicted, as Daniel predicted, his reasoning returned to him. And he understood that it's God that rules the kingdom of men. And he humbled himself. And we said that when you get to heaven, you might look over and see Nebuchadnezzar. And he finally learned that lesson to humble his heart before God. So I mentioned when we started studying Daniel, it's 12 chapters. First 6 chapters are pretty easy, pretty straightforward. But we're going to get into some really difficult visions and dreams in the last 6 chapters. But we're going to finish up the easy ones today. And probably some of the most well-known. We're going to look at chapters 5 and 6. And this is going to be the handwriting on the wall and lines down. We hope you hear that expression. I've seen the handwriting on the wall, but a lot of people may not know that it actually comes from the Bible time. We have our king. This is a diagram that talks about the kings of Babylon. It's a little confusing because we're reading this last chapter. It's identified a guy by the name of Belshazzar, that he's the king of Babylon. And he refers to Nebuchadnezzar as his father. That he wasn't his actual father. He refers to him in that way like an ancestor. The kings already referred to David as their father. I mean, they were like descendants of David. But after Nebuchadnezzar, we read the other kings, and actually the last king is this guy Nebuchadnezzar, and he is the son of Belshazzar. So what you have at the time that Babylon was going to fall is Nebuchadnezzar was like a co-regent with Belshazzar. Now, the history I've read about that he traveled a lot. And he was gone a lot. Belshazzar was there on the throne, and that's what we're going to have in chapter 5. And we have some of these other kings mentioned. This one, Evil Marduk. He's an especially important king reading about Jeremiah, because when Nebuchadnezzar had come the second time in 597 to take that second group of captives, there had been a king by the name of Jehoiakim, who reigned mostly during the time of the two captivities, but he had died, and his son Jehoiakim had become king. He only reigned 3 months in Jerusalem until he was taken into Babylonian captivity. Well, after 37 years in captivity, we're told in the book of Jeremiah, this Babylonian king, evil Merodach, that he raised Jehoiachin up, brought him out of prison, allowed him to eat at his table, and said they changed his garments from prison garments, and he was able to eat at the king's table till the day that he died. So, and I'm sure that probably some of this good deed was done to him because of the influence of, like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and some of the things that they had done for the kingdom of Babylon. But we see Belshazzar, if you go to Daniel chapter 5, that he's a foolish man. We know that Nebuchadnezzar had to learn some lessons early and be humbled by God. But here, as we begin Daniel chapter 5, it says that Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords to drink wine in the presence of 1,000. And while he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave commandment to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father, Nebuchadnezzar, had taken from the temple that had been in Jerusalem. And the king and his lords, his wife, his concubines, that they might drink from them. And they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple, from the house of the Lord, which had been in Jerusalem. And the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them, and they drank wine, and praised the God of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. And that's exactly how the book of Daniel begins in chapter 1. It tells that in the third reign of Jehoiakim, that Nebuchadnezzar came, that he took these vessels and carried them to Babylon. So they've been there for like 70 years now, and we don't know what got in his mind, but he got in this, that now they're going to have this drunken feast, filing these vessels from the house of God. And at that same time, it said a man's finger appeared on the wall, and that's where he saw the message. And it shook him up, it scared him. It said his legs became loose, his knees put together, his face drained. He was terrified. And once again, he tried to get his wise men or someone who could interpret this, handwrite it on the wall. No one could. But the queen sent word to him and remembered this. He said, "There's a man in your kingdom," verse 11, "in whom the spirit of the holy God, and in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of God, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, and the king made him chief of the magicians and astrologers and Chaldeans and soothsayers, inasmuch as an excellent spirit of knowledge and understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas, was found in Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar, and let Daniel be called." And so Daniel is brought in, and the king makes a promise that you can interpret this. You're going to be rewarded to be made third ruler in the kingdom. And that again shows to the part that Nabonidus was king and Belshazzar was his co-regent. That's why he said you'll be made third ruler in the kingdom. Well, I love what Daniel's response was. "I don't need your gifts. Keep your gifts, but I'll go ahead and I'll give the interpretation." And he reminded Belshazzar about the past. In verse 18, he said, "O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom, majesty, glory, and honor. And because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whoever he wished, he executed. Whoever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up. And whoever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was disposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the wild beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkey. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and appoints over it whomever he chooses. So he's reminded him of these events that we've already studied about. But then he says this, but you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this, and you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels from his house before you, you and your lords and your wives and your concubines have drank wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold and bronze, iron and wood, which do not see, nor hear, nor know. And the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. What is the description? We need to live every day of our life knowing that God holds our very breath and owns all our ways. And so that's why it's so important that we acknowledge God each and every day. The inscription on the wall was Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. It said the interpretation, each word, Mene, Mene, God has numbered your kingdom, and it's finished. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided, given to the Medes and Persians. It said, then Belshazzar gave command that they clothe Daniel in purple, put a gold chain around his neck, and proclaimed that he be the third ruler in the kingdom. But it said that very night, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So this is a big transition, not only in the Bible, but in history. Because Daniel, in those early dreams, had predicted that there's going to be four empires between the time of Babylon and the time of Christ. And so the first one is taking place. This is another timeline, another way of looking at this history, again from 1000 BC to the time of Christ. So back during the time of the United Kingdom, David and Solomon helped build Israel into a great, strong, earthly nation. And they had neighboring nations subject to them. So when we get in that period, remember the divided kingdom, again, that's when we have Assyria and Egypt with power. It's the time of the two kingdoms, Israel and Judah, the time of the prophets. At the time of captivity, was the time of Babylon, for 70 years. You're going to have Daniel and Ezekiel in Babylon. But now we're at this point right here. For now, the Persians will take over. Time of Cyrus is going to be the king of Persia. And we see there's two powers at the beginning, the Medo-Persian. And so in the book of Daniel, he's going to refer to Darius, king of the Medes. But also we're going to have reference to Cyrus, to the king of Persia. Now in time, the Persians are going to rule the world for like 200 years. And in time, the Persians are more dominant. Later, it's going to be known just as the Persian Empire. And this is going to be a time really in which God's people are going to prosper. Because we're going to read the decree that Cyrus issues when this first comes about. And also, Ezra and Nehemiah, all these people prospered during this time of the Persians. Go over to the book of Ezra, the first chapter. We have the proclamation of this Cyrus. It's also, if you go back a page at the end of Second Chronicles, the proclamation is there, and then it's repeated here in Ezra, at the beginning of the book of Ezra. It said, now, in the first year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, that the word of the Lord might be fulfilled, Jeremiah. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all kingdoms of the earth the Lord of heaven has given me, and he commanded me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is among you, of all his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build a house for the Lord, God of Israel, for he is God, which is in Jerusalem. And who is left in any place where he dwells, let the men of that place help them with silver and gold, with goods, livestock, besides a farewell offering for the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. So although the Babylonian captivity was a period of oppression, the Jewish people are going to prosper under the Persians, and they're given liberty. Now, not all the people, most of the Jewish people stayed scattered out in the Gentile world, but there was a group, of course, that went back. They rebuilt Jerusalem, they rebuilt the temple, and that kind of closes out the Old Testament period. And there's one other verse I want to read that kind of ties into this. It's in Isaiah. Isaiah, at the end of chapter 44, he's talking about the cities of Judah being rebuilt. And he says, verse 27, and I will say to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up your rivers. Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall perform all my pleasure. Saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple, your foundation shall be laid. They go on into chapter 45. But thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him, and to loose the arms of kings, to open before him the double doors, so that the gates will not be shut. I will go with you and make your perfect places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of bronze and cut down the bars of iron. Now, what's remarkable about this prophecy is Isaiah. He lived some 700 years before the coming of Christ. He was prophesying in Judah at the time of the Assyrians took Israel in captivity. And yet, in this prophecy, he called Cyrus by name 200 years before he was even born. So that's a great prophecy. He called Cyrus his shepherd, and of course, the decree we've already seen was carried out. So if we go back now to Daniel, I said chapter 5, we make that transition from the Babylonian Empire to the Persian. We're going to see that it's amazing that Daniel continued to prosper even at this time. He had to be an old man at this time. We don't know exactly how old he was when he was first taken. We assume he was maybe a teenager. Let's say he was 13, 15, whatever. But then he lived through the 70 years of captivity, so he had to be in his 80s at this time. And he says, please Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole realm. And over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satrap might give account to them so that the kingdom would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because the excellent spirit that was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. Let's have that. That out is my second word. I appreciate it very much. I'm sending this up, he puts it up. But this gives you an idea of, here Babylon, but Persia is going to be, this is modern day Turkey, this is Iraq, Iran, and you can see the extent of his kingdom. And we did a lesson a couple months ago on how we know that the Bible is really the inspired word of God. And one way we said was the historical accuracy, and that historical accuracy has been proven over and over again by these archaeological finds. And this is another one. It's called Cyrus the Cylinder, and this was found. It's now in the British Museum. But this tells the fall of Babylon. They did this writing. They had those uniforms. They do those silos, showing the flag. Well, this is a cylinder we've seen earlier. Back in time, Jeremiah, remember some actors in the prison. But what's amazing is these events, the Bible tells us these events happen. And then, thousands of years later, like I said, this was not discovered until like the 1800s. They had told us it's laying in the ground all that time. But when it's found, again, this proves the reliability and accuracy of the Bible. And so we have now the vast Persian Empire. We have these 120 different governors And here Daniel is with a panel of three overseeing them. And of course, this caused great jealousy. The rest of these guys, they didn't like Daniel being promoted, and they said, we got to get him some way. Now, usually, it's probably not too difficult to get some dirt on a politician. You usually find something doing wrong. But they had a problem because when they examined Daniel, he was faithful. He conducted himself so honorably and trustworthy, they could find nothing to accuse him. And they said, if we're going to accuse him of anything, it's got to be something concerning his God. And they knew that Daniel prayed to God every day. So they went sneaky way to Darius and they said, oh, king, live forever. We want you to sign a decree that no one's allowed to make a petition of anyone else or any god for 30 days. And of course, Darius was unaware of their scheme. And of course, in his ego, Paul signed this decree. Nobody can ask anything anybody but me for 30 days. So he signed the decree. And we learned something very important about kingdom. He says that he signed it according to the law of Medes and Persians. It cannot be changed. See, they believe so importantly, knew the importance of law and order. And being followed by the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans, you know, they're really responsible for Western civilization. You know. So we know that the same way it's true today. If you don't have law and order, you don't have a country. And so Darius said he went ahead and signed this decree, but Daniel did as he always did. If you look at verse 10, it said that when Daniel knew that the writing had been signed, he went home to his upper room with his window open toward Jerusalem, and he knelt down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before God, as was his custom since the early days. So ever since Daniel had been a young man, he had continued to this practice, and what an example it sets for us in the importance of prayer. For 3 times a day, and of course, the men came in, they found Daniel, and they turned him into the king, and the king didn't like it because the king, of course, was fond of Daniel. But again, he knew that it had been written, law of Medes and Persians cannot be changed. And so Daniel was cast into the lion's den. They put a stone over the mouth of the den and even put the king's seal on it so that nobody could save Daniel. So we see the sincerity of the king because when he went home, he said he didn't have any music or things that said he actually stayed up all night in great concern, and he rushed early in the morning and went running and said, "Oh, Daniel, was your king, the God that you serve, able to save you from the word of the king?" And of course, Daniel cried out. He said, "Don't be afraid." He said, "My God has sent an angel to shut the mouth of the lion because he knew your innocence and he knew my innocence as well." And so Daniel was saved from the lion's den, and those accusers, it seemed unfair to us, but their wives, their children, they were thrown to the lion's den and said they crushed their bones before they even reached the bottom of the den. And then, once again, we have this king coming to realization, just like Nebuchadnezzar before him. Darius writes, verse 25, "Then King Darius wrote to all peoples, nations, and language that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers, he rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. And who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lion?" And it says that Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. There you have both. You have both Darius and Cyrus. And so we have, once again, this example, and for me, it strengthens my faith so much when you see that our God can control the rise and fall. And that he can call Cyrus by name 200 years before he's born. And he can tell Daniel if there's going to be Babylon, there's going to be Persia. This Persia ruled the world for 200 years. But they're going to be followed by the Greeks And the Greeks are going to influence the world for 300 years, beginning with Alexander and then with the general, leading up to the time of Christ. And the most important thing, God established this church, of which we're a part now. We're become a Christian. We're citizens in the kingdom of God. So that's your lesson today. And Lord willing, next time we're going to look at Daniel chapter 7. It's a very difficult vision, so we're just